So, Joe, it's such a pleasure to meet you. I was blown away when you emailed me back, and I was hanging out, I don't know, browsing your website as I browse professors' websites, and thought it'd be fun to send you an email. And the next thing I knew, you responded. So I'm excited and delighted to have you on the podcast.
Well,
And I have a whole
great
bunch
to
of
be here.
questions. Yeah, and so Jo, everyone, is a professor of teaching mathematics. She grew up in Birmingham in the UK, and she actually taught at a comprehensive school, or what was a comprehensive school, before she ended up having this kind of like stellar career in teaching mathematics. And her new book is going to be coming out. You guys have it
It's
here. I got
out.
an advanced copy. I've been reading it and enjoying it, and I kind of knew a little bit about Jo anyway, but I have 50 minutes or so to dive into a whole bunch of questions with Jo, but I'll just pause and allow you to say hello to my viewers. And because Jo doesn't know a lot about my viewers, I'll just give you a little bit, or the listeners. So I would say that everybody who listens to my podcast is interested in one way or another in investing. And Jo, I don't know if you got a copy of my book. I'm the author of a kind of mid-career memoir on investing. But I'll just pause and let you respond to that before I dive into my questions.
Great. Well, it's really good to be here. I hope that what we can talk about will help people in their work, because what I do is really help people with quantitative thinking. And my book is out. Mathish came out last
Oh,
week.
congratulations.
So, well, it's out here in the US anyway. I'm not sure if it's out everywhere yet.
So I'm going to dive into. So Jo, I grew up in the UK, and I actually didn't do double math. So you can do A levels in the UK, which are kind of like one of three. You do three subjects normally, and I could have done double maths, physics, chemistry, but I wanted to be different. But I was one of those people that you describe in the book as having kind of a narrow math brain, I think. And but now I have three children who are a diversity of approaches to maths, and as so I think that I have Jo in her book describes kind of a three level of maths that are useful in the world. One is just like understanding numbers and fractions and how many zeros after a one, what does it mean? She goes to a second level of how do numbers move, and sort of like functions and equations, if you like. And then the third level, and I'll just point out some of the stuff that I enjoy looking at. I'm sure you're familiar with that, which is linear algebra. And I really did
Mm.
very, very little linear algebra when I was at school. And then I ended up studying law, and I did economics, and I did various things. But I feel I have a really very limited knowledge of mathematics. But I'm a numbers person, and I divide the world into numbers people and non-numbers people. And I'm useless at writing essays, even though I wrote a book, but it was like squeezing blood out of a stone. But so, but now you want to tell me that there's all sorts of ways of teaching mathematics. And so you're going to respond to me to saying, because I know you've had these conversations with other people before, so it'll be easy for you to respond. But the way I learned maths was that I just did lots and lots of problem sets, and I enjoyed doing problem sets. And there was this exhilarating feeling that as I did problem sets, it was a bit like I was in a strange world until suddenly I wasn't in a strange world.
Mm.
And actually, when you show me kind of like all these visualizations, I think that in all sorts of ways, I would have gone through those visualizations, but actually they kind of don't help me anymore in what you're describing in the book. And and then in another part of the book, you're kind of showing this network of ideas that a teacher has up on a board. But I guess my question to you, just put it to something specific, is um, isn't it just a question of doing the work? And something that your book suggests is that if maths was taught differently, then
Mhm.
maybe, and I guess I'm talking about these kind of visualizations. And I love,
Mhm.
and I'm all over the place a little bit. I love the chapter about the growth mindset and being to sit with the struggle. And effectively, I think what I'm describing is, for one reason or another, I was able to sit and struggle with the concepts until I owned them,
Mhm.
if you
Mhm.
like. But
Mhm.
what do you say to somebody who just says, you know what? just have to you have to find a way to motivate somebody to just do the exercises.
I would say that we've taught maths in that way for a very long time. Here are the numbers, here are the methods, do them. And some kids love that. You were probably one of them. I did really well and used to enjoy just going through numbers. But it turns off most people. And they do not enjoy just going through numbers. And it's not a case of just sort of pushing them harder. And what we've found over many years is when we see maths as a more creative subject, where we can see it visually, every number problem you can represent visually, it is really impactful for many people. It opens the doors of mathematics to many more people. And we also know that actually you should be thinking visually about maths. When they have studied the brains of mathematicians and compared them with other academics, that's the difference they find, is that they're using the visual areas of their brain more. Even when they're thinking about number or algebra, the visual parts of the brain are activated. So we know it's good for our brains. Just thinking with numbers develops a part of the brain. You can be very successful in maths like that, but it doesn't develop all these different parts of the brain. And so really, we just want a broader approach to maths. Of course, it's still about numbers, but we can also see it visually. We can also build with things mathematically, and that really helps develop mathematical understanding. So it's not to say that people can't be successful with just the number approach, but it's limiting for a lot of people.
And would I be right in, so it's not clear to me from your book, and maybe that is because I didn't read all the way through to the right parts, and I'm not recollecting them. But can somebody, so you would say to somebody who was good with the traditional maths, there's other ways to learn maths. There's visual ways of presenting maths. My children, when they were younger, were at Montessori schools. They use a lot of visual methods and tactile methods. But do you think that there are people that we lose to higher maths because their path into mathematics was through those visual methods? So can the people who learn maths, call it alternate routes or non-traditional routes, can they end up being great mathematicians, I guess?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, look at some of the greatest mathematicians in the world. Mariam Mirzakhani from Iran was the first woman in the world to win the Fields Medal. It's the highest honor in mathematics.
Yeah.
Her work was entirely visual. When I went to watch one of her PhD students, I was actually chairing the defense of one of her PhD students, and she presented her work to these mathematicians over some hours. Her work was entirely visual. We didn't see a number. So there's plenty of high-level mathematics that is really helped by a visual approach. Einstein was actually supposed to be somebody who really only thought visually, and there are whole books written about how he thought visually. So it definitely doesn't stop people going to higher levels, and in fact can give people additional insights into problems that help them get to higher levels. I don't know if you've ever looked at who gets to the highest levels in maths, but it's a very inequitable group of people. I mean, the demographics of that group is very inequitable, and it's not a subject that's open equally to different people.
When you say inequitable, you mean they're all white males or something, or for the vast majority?
White Asian men, mainly. And when we teach maths, I mean, I know because I've seen it taught as numbers, and I've seen what happens numbers only in a narrow way. Some kids are successful. You will probably be one of those. And I've seen it taught in this more multidimensional way with more visuals, more open problems, and lots more students are successful. So it's just really opening the subject to different ways of thinking.
So with the story that I've read for Einstein is that, he had an amazing imagination. He, with relativity, he imagined what the universe would look like if he was sitting on a photon moving through space. But then ultimately, as I understand it, in one of the books that I've read on the topic. The actual sort of precise mathematics, he needed the help of somebody who was a advanced mathematician at, I don't know if it was University of Zurich or ETH, and he couldn't do the maths on his own, actually, which is to your point. But I want to so I'll go to a different place. I think that the world is of mathematics, I must imagine, is exploding. I'm at a point in my career where I really am sorry about all sorts of things that I didn't learn when I could have, if I'd have become a student, an eternal student, perhaps. And some of it's in maths and some of it's not in maths. But if we go to maths for a second, there are two amazing channels that I'm sure you've come across. One is Numberphile, which is run by a couple of Brits. And the other is by this guy who's recently been interviewed by Lex Friedman, 3 Blue, 1 Brown. And now, I love watching those videos. I just love it. But I believe that those, and there's an enormous amount of visualization that takes place on those YouTube videos. But I believe that I come away with an illusion of knowledge. I don't actually know what I'm looking at. And if you ask me to recall what I just saw, if you ask me to actually explain the ideas, I can't really explain them. And so they create this kind of beautiful sense of entertainment. And
I mean, it's much harder to understand the mathematics of what's happening than it is to appreciate and see the beauty of what they're producing. But that doesn't mean you couldn't understand it if you wanted to dig in and get more, do more work on it. But so, yes, I agree.
Well, what am I doing then? Because I came to the conclusion, I didn't really think it was the case at first. I thought, wow, this is great. I'm learning mathematics in my spare time at 11 o'clock at night when I've got nothing better to do. And the reality was I was just being entertained by the illusion. And I have a question when it comes down to tutoring, actually. To what extent does a high school tutor, what they're actually doing is giving the student a false sense of confidence? And forgive me for coming back to it, but at what point do you, your chapter on effectively having a growth mindset. So, if you're in a stressed place, feeling unself-confident and wondering if you're absolutely dumb, that's a great place to be. And if you just stay with that for about 3 or 4 more hours longer, you'll get to an amazing place. And there's actually no substitute for that. And any amount of props are just props.
Yeah. I don't know that I'm fully understanding what you mean by the props, but certainly
the illusion of knowledge.
We know that how you think about yourself and whether you think you can keep going actually changes how your brain operates. That's some of the research from Langchen I put in the book. They now know that what you believe about maths actually changes the functioning of your hippocampus. It's the interlinking of beliefs and knowledge that we now know is taking place. But let me give you a simple example of something I would say is better. In a maths class, you probably had it times where you were doing things like find the area of an 8x3 rectangle.
Yeah.
That's a calculation. You could just take the numbers, you calculate it. We ask students instead, what rectangles can you find with an area of 24? So now they're thinking about different rectangles. They're thinking about the relationship between length and width. They're drawing. They can see what how these rectangles differ from each other. It's just a much more engaging, more conceptual experience for students. And that's what we're wanting more of, opening up maths questions, making them more visual.
And so do you, so I guess the real proof would be if we could trace, and I don't know if we've had enough time yet. I mean, that an increasing proportion of Fields medalists were educated in a non-traditional way of mathematics, I guess, would be a good.
I would say, yeah, but most mathematicians will tell you that maths is this conceptual subject that we should be not just working out procedures. We should be thinking more deeply about what the concepts mean. If you look at Steve Strogatz, for example, who's an amazing mathematician and writes a lot of books for the public, and he's at Cornell University. He talks about, first of all, he says he bumbled his way through his math degree because there weren't visuals and it didn't value intuition, but he just carried on going and managed to get through. But he talks about how important it is for him to see math visually and conceptually. He's written a whole book about a conceptual visual approach to calculus. And one of his studies is amongst the top 100 most cited studies in the world. So by all standards, he's a top mathematician.
Yeah.
And he will tell you he was turned off by just having abstract numbers.
I mean, I think if I go, I don't know why it happened to me that, some of my friends here are maths professors, 2 of them are Fields medalists. I cannot actually, and of the 3 friends who are maths professors, I mean, it started when I met at a social engagement. I met one guy who's an expert. He developed a whole new area of mathematics called mod-phi transformations. I've tried to look at his papers. I have no idea what they mean. He gave me a book on the Riemann hypothesis. I read this whole book. I thought it was incredible. And I tried to explain to somebody at a dinner party what I'd read about. And I realized it was like I hadn't read the book, if you like. But if I just to bring you to something more basic, I was at the Hay Festival. That if you're actually a newly published author can go to the Hay Festival. I hope you're invited, and I hope you go. It's a wonderful festival in the area, but in Hay-on-Wye between England and Wales. And Marcus du Sautoy had a book on symmetry. So now I get all excited and I start reading John Conway, and I'm reading about Leach lattices, and I'm thinking, but I don't really understand what it means. And
well, then,
and then I got a flash of
insight. Learning, I can tell you why.
Say again?
I can tell you why.
Yeah, go on.
Know. I mean, I study learning and understanding. That is my field. And what we know is you don't understand things just by reading about them. The same as you don't typically understand things just by somebody telling you them. You really have to do the work. You really have to be doing the problems to develop that understanding. So I teach undergrads at Stanford, and I'm always telling them this: don't study for exams in maths by reading through your notes. You have to be doing the questions. That is the only way those pathways are laid down in the brain. So, I mean, when people write amazing books like Marcus du Sautoy, he understands it, but he's really giving us an opportunity to get a little insight into the work, not to fully understand it ourselves, I guess.
But so if you're somebody, I guess you're an amateur mathematician or a wannabe mathematician, and I think that I don't think I'm the only one. There are a lot of adults who say, "Wow, I really wish I knew more." What's really important actually is that we should stop reading and start doing, in a way,
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's not, I mean, and you're right to focus on this. You're focused on high school education, maybe even undergraduate education. And I guess us adults are left behind, basically. We're just in a different category. But actually what's come back, I mean, interestingly enough, so I'm determined not to get to the end of my life. And I think there are many people like me. I have plenty of the first 2 kinds of mathematics that you talk about. I think I've got enough of that. But then when you get to the 3rd kind, when you get to linear algebra, let alone, complex analysis, let's say, or other kind of incredible concepts. And what tantalizes me is that it's a belief. I have no underpinning for it, that once you learn these things, they come out in all sorts of ways in the quality of your thinking. but it's not
I
going to
agree.
happen if I just read another maths book. You know, it's going to happen because I solve the problems at the end of the chapters. And what I've come to is I've learned that if I'm really worried about something in my life, if I try and tackle, meaning I read the introductory pages to a book that I don't understand about mathematics, somehow it takes my mind off my problems, sort of relaxes me.
Mm.
But actually, what
Hmm.
I've realized is that if I want to advance my knowledge of mathematics, I just have to go back to the basics of, actually, I think that where I'm at is linear algebra, which is why I have this Strang book here, because he seems to be one of the best teachers of linear algebra. But the point is to go and start doing the exercises in the back, basically, and
Yeah,
sort of.
yeah. That is the only way, I think, to really understand it, and to get into that place of struggle where it's difficult. That's the real understanding we get when we're finding something difficult. That's when the brain's super active, and where real sort of deep understanding comes. Getting things, trying something, getting it wrong, trying it again, getting it wrong, trying it again, getting it right. That will build what you really need to build in your brain, and is really what we need.
And just to go back to the education of children, I mean, you know, so it's very, very hard. I mean, I guess if you're already in a Montessori style classroom and you're being playful around mathematical concepts, which from your perspective is training the teachers really to create the environment that makes it that this playful thing where you can find 5 different ways to approach the subject or approach the concepts.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but to try and motivate a child into having a growth mindset at the point of maximum struggle when it's most frustrating is
Mm-hmm.
you just, I mean, I guess, I don't know, have you had any success with it? What
Yeah, I mean, we find that the best way for young people to develop growth mindsets is to learn about their brain. A lot of kids think that if they struggle, that means their brain's not as good, they're not a math person. But when we show them videos of their brains processing, when they see that actually it's good to be in a place of struggle, that's when your brain is really on fire with activity. These showing them and helping them understand how the brain works is really helpful in developing a growth mindset. That's when kids, I mean, when we work with young people, we just share with them, we want you to struggle, because that's when your brain is really on fire with connections, and we're going to give you difficult work so that you can struggle. They are more willing to keep going, they're more willing to struggle than when they're in a regular classroom and they think, oh, I'm struggling, that means I'm not very good.
and that's this
So those
concept of,
brain messages are super important.
that's this idea of metacognition basically.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and
And
so
having kids.
so at what, just to get a sense, I mean, you know, certainly a 3-year-old's not going to understand that. At what point, I mean, at what point do you does are they capable of absorbing these ideas, I guess?
Well, interestingly, they start to see different mindsets in children as young as 3. And the thinking behind that is students develop fixed mindsets when they're very young, when they are, when struggle or mistakes are seen as a bad thing in parenting. And when they're praised for in very fixed ways, they can develop fixed mindsets really from a young age. So praise is very important. Not praising kids by saying you're a genius, you're amazing,
Yeah.
because what kids hear from that is, oh great, I'm a genius, but then the next time they mess up they think, I'm not a genius. So we have to praise kids by saying, I really like your thinking there, what you did with that building is really creative. Be more focused on things they've done rather than, so all of these things actually develop mindsets pretty early on.
You know, and then
But
you have the experience of the schools themselves as a parent. From a parental perspective, there's so little that you
mhm,
can do against the schools. I
it's
mean, just to,
true.
I was very nervous once going out on a small speedboat with my father-in-law, and I very much wanted my children to try water skiing. And to your point, what I figured out was, I was going to say, I said to all of my children, well, the only thing we're going to do here is we're going to fail to water ski. And I want you to show me how you
Mm-hmm.
fail to water ski. You cannot get up. You can only fail. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
peals of laughter, and they all ended up getting up. And I was like, you failed to fail. I wanted you to fail, all those good things.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
But very, very hard to get that, for example, in a traditional British school environment, for example,
Mm-hmm.
where I think that even
Yeah,
many of the teachers understand that they want it different, but there's so many elements to the system that come together to just make it
that's
really,
right. The
really hard to
system
create
works
change.
against it. Mm-hmm. The system really works against students developing growth mindsets. And the latest research on mindset is showing that kids don't get growth mindsets from just saying these good words. You need to, keep going, and struggle's good. You need what they call a mindset culture inside schools where everything aligns with a mindset approach. Assessment is a really important part of it. If students just get scores or grades, that tells them nothing about how they can improve. So we
Yeah.
want to be assessing kids differently, giving them feedback, showing them pathways ahead. Many parts of the school system impact mindsets for kids.
So to go to a completely different place where I think that I was one of these kids who was strong in sciences, but I really struggled with things like history and English. And actually, funnily enough,
Mm.
for your interest right now, I'm at my own pace because I want to and I can. I'm actually doing a history degree. And people come and
Mm.
ask me, why are you doing a history degree? What was so interesting to you about history? And I'm kind of like, well, if there would have been a maths degree, I would have done that as well. But they're actually not adult education courses for maths, whereas history, it's all over the place. And I think that what's fascinating for me is I
Huh.
haven't applied myself to many of the modules, but I'm not learning what I expected to learn. Actually, I was expecting to learn facts and dates, and actually, what I'm learning is how to do things with stories. But I'm just curious. I know that you
Interesting.
spent
Yeah.
much of your life thinking about how to teach maths, but
Yes.
but do you have any insights into these other areas? I mean, I really felt like I was a dunce in these other subjects, and still for me, the students, I mean, I studied law for a couple of years and then ended up in economics, which is a kind of like physics, and it was kind of
Mm-hmm.
mathematical, and I
Mm-hmm.
took that approach to it. And these kids who got really good grades at subjects like English and history,
Mm-hmm.
and I kind of, it was like alchemy to me. I didn't really understand
Mm-hmm.
where they were at. And perhaps the way kids who are not very good at maths feel about the kids that are good at maths. Do you have any insights for me?
Well, a lot of what I share in my book and in previous books actually applies to all subjects. My last book was called Limitless Mind, to get the ideas out to people in any subject area, that approaching content with a more multi-dimensional perspective will help people learn it and learn it more effectively. So, English shouldn't just be reading. There are things you can do to learn about English, that bring the subject alive. And this is true for anything. I did want to say, though, that if ever you want to do a degree in anything, you should look at the Open University in the UK, which is an incredible place. I got an honorary degree from the Open University 2 years ago, but it offers degree programs to anybody in the world with no prerequisites at all. So anybody can take a degree in maths or whatever they want, history, and great approaches to the teaching. I'm a big fan of the Open University. But
You know,
yes, to answer your question, we can make all subjects more multidimensional with growth mindset messages, and the students will be helped. I have a lot of teachers who follow me in our work who don't teach maths, who teach other subjects, and get a lot from it.
I think that when I've talked to my daughter about learning maths with certain teachers, I get the feeling actually the teachers themselves don't understand the multidimensional approach, that they actually themselves only understand one approach to
That's
solving a
true.
particular set of
That's true.
problems. So they don't
Yeah.
master the subject themselves,
That's
which,
right. And that's why it's so hard to change teaching.
but for what it's worth in
We
the world today, I mean, so I'm, I'm at a, so I forgive me because for 1 hour, for one short hour, I get to explore my interests with a professor, which is really rather extraordinary. Um, I'm a guy so if I spend all of my life thinking about how to make my investors richer, I know that that's not the best possible life. And um, so for example, the reason why I'm doing we live in Zurich, so the reason why I'm doing the history degree here is I get to do it in German, which would be an extraordinary challenge for me, except that I get to write the essays in English. But if you talk about approaching a subject from many different standpoints, I've made myself read through a book in French, but I was able to do it. I had downloaded the audiobook in English, the audiobook in French, the book in English and in French, and I could move between all those different modes of reading the
That's
book
great. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
attack it from all sorts of different angles. But in a sense, the story that you're telling me is that to the extent that I felt like I wasn't good at subjects like history or English, it's that actually randomly I had been confronted with a kind of a blockage related to the particular person I was at the time, and it's got nothing to do with my identity, actually, and nothing to do with what my brain is capable of. So I'll ask you another question, which for me is
Yeah.
exercised me a
Happens.
lot, is there's a lot of evidence that shows that how well you perform in sports just depends on what month you were born in, and selection of, because at a younger age, your degree of maturity
I've
makes a
seen that.
huge difference.
I've
And
seen that.
yeah, and what are we supposed to just accept that? Or
I don't think that's true, though. I mean, it's a factor. And if you're one of the older students in your age grade that you're taught in, you will be more physically developed and more encouraged. Same is true of the brain, actually. But it's just a factor. I can tell you, I have a daughter who's 17 and has been recruited by many top universities to go and play soccer at the highest level in the US. She's also being looked at by the English national team. So she's good. She's the youngest in her year from the month she was born. And she's had 2 times of tearing an ACL. She's only 17 and she's already torn her ACL twice. But the first time she tore it, she had always been a goalie, but she didn't want to be a goalie. She wanted to play on the field, and she tore her ACL. She spent 9 months watching games, just really focused watching. She came back into soccer. They said they'd give her a chance playing on the field. She scored 4 goals every game, and she's never stopped playing on the field, playing as a striker. But I wrote about this in Limitless Mind. They found this now, that you can get better at a sport by studying the sport. You can get better at playing the piano by studying the music, because part of being a good kicker of the ball happens in the brain. It's like a connection in the brain. And the other part is the physical bit.
Yeah.
But she was, I think, developing a lot of the brain part that she needed, so that when she went back, she was able to just add in the physical part.
You see,
But
I want
anyway,
to believe that. Let's just imagine that we had created a duplicate of your daughter, who is a duplicate and a carbon copy. I want to believe that the reason why your daughter learned watching soccer was that she was either consciously or subconsciously visualizing what the players were doing. So she had mirror neurons in her brain,
yeah,
who taking in those moves, but a carbon copy of her that was watching, but with a different intent. And you mentioned Ericsson. It's all about the intent with which you do it.
Yeah.
Somehow randomly she managed to do that while watching soccer, basically.
Yeah, I agree with that. And she was super motivated to learn, and I'm sure was developing these neurons in the right way. And somebody else could have watched it and had a wholly different experience. I agree.
For example, if she wasn't naturally interested in it and just did it because one of her parents told her to, and she was having a negative reaction to her parents.
Totally different.
And it's interesting that some of the world's great soccer players, I mean, there's actually, so Maradona is one and Messi is another. They're not particularly elegant movers at all. But
No.
boy, what they do with the ball is extraordinarily elegant.
Yeah.
I used to play a lot of tennis, and I remember seeing tennis players who were certainly not as physically strong or as fit, but they had
But they have an
they call
amazing
it an eye for the
technique.
ball. But so But
you can
what do you
develop that
say?
technique.
I'm
So
sure you've heard it many times, because there's also just the likelihood that your daughter, when it comes to eyes for the ball, that kind of intelligence, she's extremely gifted on that level. And so, what do you say to the people who say, "Look, you're it's a really nice idea, and it's certainly empowering, and it certainly can have impact, but at the end of the day, at some point, there is just raw talent and raw
it's all to
ability."
do with their genes. Yeah, I mean, I just don't. Well, first of all, it's very much under debate how much of it is all to do with your genes, because we know that every second you're born, opportunities are coming your way, and you can change things about yourself. But even if there is a part played by how you're born, it's not really a helpful message for people. What is helpful to know is that people can change their outcomes, and it
Yeah.
to do with their hard work and what they do. Um, I don't think it's clear cut at all that people's genes are going to
Yeah.
determine what happens.
But then there's also I mean, there's an allocation of the individual's energy to the thing that delivers the highest return. So maybe I could, if I set my mind to it, become a great essay writer. But
I'm sure you could. I'm
yeah,
sure you could. Yeah.
but maybe if I set my mind to solving maths problems, I could make a lot more progress there. And so there is some element, some point where you have to decide, well, actually, where's the best use of my
Yeah. I
energy?
mean, by the time we're adults as well, we've really developed our brains in particular ways. So it would be a lot harder, a lot bigger lift to try and excel in some area that you haven't, really been developing over the years.
And something that really bothers me. So as I've done just a little bit of history, I realize there's a whole bunch of things that I didn't expect to learn that I learned, and
Mm.
and I haven't even done a lot yet. And if I think of the little I know of mathematics, I'm tantalized by the possibility that for some reason, if I study both those things and three other things at the same time, there'll be something that happens in my brain that gives me unique insights into something. And but maybe that's just a pipe dream.
I don't think it's a pipe dream. I think you could develop a real interest in something and take it in a new direction, and
Now,
who knows?
in your teaching mathematics, did you ever want to sort of like push the boundaries of your knowledge of sort of like, I mean, I happen to be in a romantic way, not because that I haven't actually done the work with this pure mathematics. Did you ever find yourself wanting to actually just go to the frontier of the mathematics itself rather than teaching it?
I did. Well, I really enjoyed mathematics, but I became really fascinated early in my career about how people learn and how the brain processes mathematics and what really helps that. I can even remember, as a school child being interested in what teachers were doing and how that changed what we could do as children. So when I was studying mathematics, I started to think more and more about that. And I was also studying psychology. So I went in the how do we learn mathematics as my thing that was really fascinating to me.
Yeah. And so
I
I
could,
want
I
to,
mean, especially now, probably now more than then, I would be interested in just doing more and more maths.
yeah,
Um,
I
but
want to
I
go
don't really have
to,
the time now.
we have about 10 minutes left. I want to go to a slightly different place. So, one of my closest friends from university was from Birmingham, and
Mm,
I was an immigrant to the UK. I didn't grow up, until age 11, I was growing up in other places. And I don't think I ever visited Birmingham until I was about 22 years old. And there's this
mhm,
huge north-south divide in the UK. And then you all, and just to bring a little bit more into it, I'm married to somebody who grew up in Mexico. My wife's Mexican, and
mhm,
I'm just curious if you're able to tell me and the listeners, viewers, the story of how you ended up in the US, what brought you back to the US, how you see, two very similar cultures divided by a common language, as
mm,
somebody said,
mm,
and just across different national cultures and approaches to this growth mindset, I guess. I'm curious.
Yeah, I did grow up in England. I went to London. I went to Liverpool University, my undergraduate degree, and then to King's College in London, where I did a master's degree and a doctoral degree. And then I was presenting the results of my doctorate at a conference in Greece, Athens, when members of the Stanford faculty were in the audience, and they came straight up to me and said, "We want you to come to Stanford." I was working at King's College at the time and really enjoying London and very happy with my life. And I said no. So they started sending me picture books of California and said to me, "Just come for a visit. We'll pay. Come for a visit and see what you think." And that I came. They put me up in Half Moon Bay, which is like this beautiful coastal area, and eventually I thought, well, it's an experience. I should give it a try. So decided to come over to California and stayed here for about 7 years before I had children here and decided to move back to be closer to family in England. And then I stayed there for 3 years and came back to California.
So, I think that for me, arriving in the US age, I started living in the US age 24, and and the first time I was in the US was age 19, and it profoundly changed me. The first time I was in the US was actually, I went to Harvard Summer School between my second and third year at university, and it profoundly changed me. It
How did it
empowered
change
me.
you?
So I feel like the way I had learned to be in the UK was to know my place. And I was trying to fulfill the role of what I was expected to be. And those 8 weeks in the US gave me the confidence to speak my mind and to be willing to stand up. And that was in part because I was thrown into boarding school at 11, where the hammer that sticks up gets hammered down. And so for me, the United States is all about a growth mindset and can-do spirit, kind of like in the water that you drink. But that's, there are plenty of people who grow up in the UK.
The American dream.
But there are plenty of people who move through the social rankings hierarchy in the UK, and they achieve extraordinary things. So Richard Branson was not born into a privileged household, but achieved extraordinary things. So it does happen in the UK. And I'm just
curious. But you're right. There are more expectations of who I think should be successful. I found that in the UK with age, actually. When I finished my doctorate, I was, 20 something and was offered a job at Oxford University. And they offered me this job with a £10,000 pay cut from my job at King's College, because I would be put right at the bottom of the scale, which was done by age. So I didn't take the job. That was like half of the salary at the time. That was a lot of money. And then was offered the job at Stanford and came and took the job at Stanford. But they and Cambridge, who were also like considering me for a job, thought I was too young. Now, in the States, that would never happen. People would love that you were young.
Yeah.
But we do have those kind of barriers, I think, in the UK, and expectations of who can do things.
And whether in the UK or the US, very certainly you will have diverse classes of people who have Latin backgrounds, who come from all sorts of different backgrounds. And I'm just curious to what I mean. Certainly, I'm certain that this book and the others that you've written are addressing a broad audience. But to the extent that are there particular groups who either would particularly benefit, or I spent a lot of time thinking about the environment that my wife grew up in, and I get a little frustrated because I feel like Mexico, which is a country that I'm very familiar with, is badly in need of feminism. is badly in
Mhm.
need of a very basic form of feminism, because there are
Mhm.
unequal pay scales. And I find it shocking. I guess I'll put this to you, and then I'm sure you've had plenty of Hispanic women, Mexican men. What
Mhm.
really upsets me is that the ways in which, and in this case, I'm seeing it through perspective of a woman. It's communicated to a woman in that country that they're not worthy of the same
Mhm.
results, whether it's in pay
Yeah.
scales, whether it's in the jobs that they're encouraged to take, whether it's the ways that they dress, the ways they're expected to show up.
Mhm.
And the
Mhm.
worst of it is that they're not aware, this is the water that they swim in. So they're not aware that
Mhm.
they're swimming
Right.
in
So
water.
yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
come across that?
I, I mean, certainly that's upsetting, I think, and it's definitely those gender barriers are more present in some countries than others. I mean, they're here too, and we see that in who goes forward in academia. Academia is still a place that's pretty harsh for women. We see women are less often promoted, more often leave, less often get the jobs. So those kind of discriminatory ideas are at play in different places, the UK,
Is it?
Switzerland, the US, but definitely it's more in some countries. And I
I
think the
mean,
Latin culture is rather masculine.
in a way, you're teaching us, the general public, about maths. Is mathematics teaching has been discriminatory towards a certain kind of mind, and it's
Hmm.
very unfair on other kinds of minds. And we need to make it equitable. And I'm sort of bringing up a different kind of diversity. And have you thought
Hmm.
about how do you make, say, math or any other kind of teaching, or one great environment in which to kind of try and tackle these things is a university environment, or a
Hmm.
school environment. And it may
Hmm.
not be maths versus not maths, or in my case, essays versus not non-essays. Um, well, I guess it's a very hot topic, but it doesn't. It's what you're doing is you're showing people that they are able to do this stuff. Whereas,
Yeah.
forgive me, I'm going to bring up a very, very controversial word now. DEI, equity and inclusion,
Hmm. Hmm.
are trying to force the result by administrative mandate, and they're not actually going
Mm.
into how you actually bring the person out of themselves. They're just like forcing the result by telling people they have to get the result without actually making any real changes. And
Mm.
I mean, I don't know. I think I'm quite confident that that approach will fail. Whereas what you're doing is you're trying to get it from the inside out, I guess. Um,
That is what we're trying to do, yeah. And I don't know, I can't speak to these different approaches that are, as you say, have been tagged as controversial now and are different
yeah.
in all sorts of places. But that is really what we're trying to do, is have everybody know that their own potential is probably a lot more than they think, and that they can do well with the right kind of approach, the right mindset,
And so,
and opportunities to see maths differently or other subjects. So it is about really empowering people, all people.
I'll leave you with kind of like some closing comments and make sure we bring this little conversation to a close within the top
Hmm.
of the hour. Um, the sort of like, for the person who hasn't read your book, or the person who has read your book but hasn't paid attention, there's like a couple of messages that you want to take them to take away, what you want to achieve with the book, what you want to see unfold in the world. And then the second part of it will be, what else should somebody read who has fully absorbed the book?
So yeah, what I want people to know is that there are different ways of approaching maths, and the way you approach it matters. And that people who are successful have learned a range of strategies and have learned an approach to their own thinking, and a set of self beliefs that help them be successful. And so, what I'm trying to do in the book is teach that to everybody
Yeah.
to help them be more successful.
Um,
And what was the second one?
oh, so imagine somebody's read your book and
Oh, what
they liked
else?
it. Where else do
Hmm.
they need to go?
So
They need to go here,
we have a
or
website called U Cubed, U Y O U Cubed. mathishstory.org, which is at Stanford University and has lots and lots of resources on that site where people can find more articles, more maths tasks, all sorts of things. And I've developed a new website called mathish.org where resources from the book Mathish will sit, because I wanted to develop things that people could use in classrooms that really aren't inside a book. So those are the two places I would say.
Yeah. And how successful have you been relative to what you could be, do you think?
Mm-hmm.
How close are you?
Wow,
How would you rate yourself?
That's such a hard question. I feel that we've reached a lot of people. We get about 500,000 people a month coming to our website. So that feels good. They're coming, they're using the resources, they're sharing these ideas with kids. It's still a little drop in the ocean compared to all the people who could be helped. So I tend to think of my own, how successful we are in terms of how many people are we reaching. You can come to our website or read my book and think, nah, don't want it. But I would like people to at least have had the opportunity to read it and see it and decide.
And I think that, look, you found your way to me. And so I think that, and I think that it's, I deeply appreciate those academics who think really hard about their role in broader society and are not just communicating to other academics. And you clearly are communicating to the whole planet, which is why the people from Stanford were smart to acquire you, and all of the UK, but it's all English language, so it's for the benefit and the world. I mean, I'm sure the book's translated, and if they haven't, they will be. But Jo, thank you so much for taking the time. Such a pleasure
Yeah, thank
to
you,
meet you.
Guy.
Everyone, I'll
Yeah,
have these
really good,
links.
really
I think
interesting.
it's extraordinarily generous of you to accept an invitation from somebody who's just a minuscule nothing. But it's smart as well, because you'll reach yet a new audience. I have a lot of Indian
Which I
followers,
love.
so half of India will be watching
Fantastic.
you now. And
Great.
wishing you a very good rest of the day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you so much.
Take
Yeah.
care.